Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Woke Wednesday. Now I know I repeat this every single time we have a new Woke Wednesday, but all the same disclaimers apply: opinions, not facts, and I love input, so please give it to me. And it should also be noted that although I'm going to try and answer all the questions as best and thoroughly as I can, it isn't my day off, so I might get cut a little short. So if you remember from last week's Woke Wednesday, the last topic that I got to talk about before time was up was the difference between overt and covert racism, but we didn't get to finish. And although I don't want to start from the very beginning, it is important to do a little bit of a recap in case the definitions were unclear or there are certain details that were left out. So, from what we went over, we understood covert, or however we pronounce it, to mean subtle, maybe unnoticed, and overt to mean blatantly obvious and pretty clear. We also talked a little bit about how with overt racism, it's pretty obvious that someone dislikes or has hatred against an entire group of people, whether through symbolism or words. Now, what we didn't get to finish talking about is how microaggressions, which I'll define again really soon, is another manifestation of covert racism and how that works. Now, the thing about microaggressions is that there's no one way that you see a microaggression taking place or manifesting itself. It can be through words, actions, attitudes, or behaviors. And again, this is what makes it so difficult to actually identify and call out, because just as much as hanging a Confederate flag outside your home discriminates against a group, so does calling a group ghetto. And the thing is, microaggressions don't just take place against just any one group, but really the stereotypes that dog a certain group or people often are what inform the microaggressions that happen against them. And the saddest thing is that even the most well-intentioned person can often fall prey into giving into the use of microaggressions, whether it's through the attitudes they support, things that they do. And although many people might not necessarily agree with this, I would actually be one to say that in many ways, covert racism is significantly more dangerous and harmful than overt racism. And it's because of the lack of realization or understanding the fact that the actions and behaviors that people are adopting are in fact discriminating, marginalizing, and oppressing groups of people. Oftentimes it's the cases of covert racism where people will get very defensive when called out on their actions, saying terms like, "I'm not racist," or "I was just joking," or "it's not a big deal." Well, unfortunately, both forms of racism are probably going to exist for a very, very long time. But in the same way, both forms of racism can be prevented and helped by a little bit of education. A very important disclaimer should be put in place before I answer this question. As though I've been privy to and observed a lot of interracial relationships, I have never personally been in one and am not myself biracial. The simple answer to the question is no. Although interracial relationships do exist and have been on the rise in recent times, this unfortunately does not mark an end to racism or discrimination. Now, having said that, interracial relationships of any sort, whether romantic or friendly, do mark an important milestone in the crossover of cultural understanding and perception. However, the existence of these relationships does not necessarily mean that those engaged in the relationships are suddenly immune to having their own cultural biases or discriminatory opinions on different races and cultures. If anything, assuming that someone knows everything about someone else's culture simply because of their relationship with someone of that culture is very similar to assuming that someone knows everything about their own race, which is untrue. On the other hand, it's really important to understand the discrimination that interracial couples will face themselves, whether it's skepticism or stereotypical assumptions from friends and strangers alike. The more distinct two people's cultures may be, the more it can be expected that they'll face disapproval or discrimination from those that they're close to and also just those looking from the outside. So all in all, racism isn't over because people date interracially. But if anything, interracial relationships give us a whole new look into what discrimination looks like. Look at all these beautiful human beings and their wonderful different hair types and so on and so forth. Oh, I don't know what Mia's doing. Now, in all honesty, on the topic of black hair, which almost goes back to the very first question on Woke One Day, it's always a matter of understanding the nuances of the topic. There's no one way, right way, black or white way to do one's hair, whether natural, relaxed, or otherwise. However, there are a lot of unspoken rules and nuances that go into hair culture. For black women, hair is a statement of power as much as it is a statement of individuality, of culture, of heritage, and history. That's why it's so complicated. There are so many rules and regulations that society, whether it be society as a whole or even the black community, set forward to what counts as good hair or acceptable hair. Oftentimes, whether you're interviewing for a job or trying to get any respectable position of any sort, you're expected to wear your hair straight, as that is the proper standard. And if you do decide to wear your hair natural, it then becomes a game of having the right curl pattern, whether it's loose enough, if you know how to take care of it, if you use the right products, the list goes on. And in the midst of trying to find one's place in this giant realm of questions and confusion, that's why a black woman's hair becomes part of her identity, part of how she defines herself. That's why people are often met with such visceral reactions when they decide to, without invitation, put in their opinion on others' hair. Because in truth, it's not really yours to comment on. And even more so, that is where the large reaction to touching black women's hair comes from. It's similar to touching a pregnant woman's belly, when it's literally not your place. And circling back to the topic of microaggressions that we were talking about before, the majority of microaggressions that a black woman will experience are somehow related to her hair or appearance.